Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today, it's a blast from the past as Art Deco homage watches from Rolex and Patek Philippe go head-to-head. This is Rolex Cellini Prince versus Patek Philippe Gondolo 5124G. Let us start with the Challenger. Sequentially, the Rolex was the first of these models to debut as it launched at Basel World 2005 and was discontinued at the end of 2014. The timepiece had a relatively long run, but it was scarcely produced. Inspired by the 1928 Rolex Prince form watch, the Cellini Prince was unusual in many respects. A non-oyster Rolex, a manual wind Rolex, and yes, a Rolex with a display case back, the first ever as a matter of fact. The timepiece is easy to wear on the wrist. It is bold. There's no mistaking the presence of a Cellini Prince. That said, it fits well. On my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, the timepiece's outright dimensions aren't quite as outrageous as the wrist presence would suggest. You think this watch might be huge? In fact, it's only 46.8 millimeters lug to lug, and on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, that's quite reasonable. You can wear this watch well, with proportion and security, on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. It's a fairly thin watch, too. Not being highly water resistant, nor equipped with an automatic system, Rolex could really thin out the case to 10 millimeters. It's one of the slimmest Rolex watches you'll encounter. Across the case, from what would conventionally be 9 to 3, it's 28.2 millimeters, which means the timepiece is relatively tall and narrow. The spacing between the lugs, should you wish to accessorize, is 19 millimeters, but the factory strap is rich and well chosen. You can see it's thick cut. The first thing you'll notice about it is that unlike most Rolex watches, you feature a strap with a bonded profile, so it's very close coupled to the case so that there's no daylight showing. The watch is very integrated in its aesthetic, and that's a trait it shares with the Patek, though it's more so with the Rolex as it's drilled very close to the case and there's a little revetment to let the strap pivot. But the bonded profile means you have large rectangular scale alligator leather with a gloss finish and a thick side, but no apparent stitching. As you can see, a bonded strap, calfskin on the top, gator on the top, calfskin on the bottom, and no clear means of joining the two. Bonded together, it's incredibly elegant. The clasp is substantial. You'll note there are 4 anchoring points for changing the root of the strap to fine-tune, and then the clasp when closed is quite secure. It's a full white gold clasp, I should say properly gray gold. Both Patek and Rolex in this test using their own alloy of white gold that is 18 karat white but not rhodium plated. It's white straight through. There's a little curve to make it easier to dig your finger in and grab the clasp. The double clasp being a significant point of distinction from the Patek, which uses a pin buckle. The case band is strong but simple. As you can see, there's a little bit of a break in the case band, with the mid case being somewhat recessed, and it starts at the lug where there's a little bit of a fluting outboard of the center, and that continues through the mid case almost like a suspension form, and it continues on the opposite side for parallelism of design. There's a little bit of a rolled gadroon style profile to the end of the case, and it gives way to a high polished bezel that frames a sensational rayon dial. White gold hands, white gold Rolex 5-point coronet, and white gold tri-Arabics. There's a white gold index at the base of the dial too, as well as one just below the 6 framing the small seconds. A combination of color, textures, materials, and changes of plane. It is a remarkably nuanced dial and one of the most distinctive Rolex has ever created in this or any era. As you can see, it's quite reactive in the light, as it's not a sunburst, but a deeper and sharper pattern with 3 dimensions. It has length and width and height in a way a sunburst does not. A panoply of colors. It has a classically cool sporting tritone of silver, black, and red. And turning the watch over, you'll note that one of the distinctive features of the caliber 740 family, I'll get as close as I can, keep this in focus, was that the decoration of the bridge was identical to the dial. So across the 4 different versions of the Cellini Prince, you had 4 different decoration styles for the movement. This one is both shaped and sized for the case, and as you can see, it is a clean slate design, designed for the Prince rather than adopted from a existing Rolex movement. Free-sprung, full bridge, Rolex Paraflex, proprietary shock protection, COSC chronometer, manual wind, 70-hour power reserve, beating away at 4 hertz. Now, the watch itself is elegant by sports watch standards, which means generally Rolex standards, as most Rolex watches are sporting references, but it's almost a juggernaut in profile compared to the elegance of Patek Philippe's 5124. Now, this is part of the Gondolo collection that was itself launched in 1993 in homage to the Gondolo collection, the Cronometro Gondolo, ordered by Gondolo e Laborio of South America, and it was a series of watches made for the Latin American market, especially in Brazil. So this watch specifically, part of the Gondolo collection, bowed in 2008 at Basel World, using the caliber from the prior year's exorbitantly priced 5098 Gondolo in perhaps a more versatile package. The timepiece is easy to wear and slimmer than the Rolex. Let's get super close and improve the focus a little bit, because these watches, being dramatically cambered with odd depth, can be difficult to capture. But that's to your advantage as an owner. The complexity and the grace are exceptional. Cambered shape, as opposed to the Rolex, which is more of a flat broncard or a board, this watch, lug to lug, is only 42.8, so it works well on a smaller wrist than the Rolex. It's also far slimmer. The Rolex is 10 millimeters, this is 7.7 millimeters, and across the case, 33.2, with a spacing between the lugs of 22 millimeters, which gives it an odd contrast with the Rolex. It's slimmer, and lug to lug it's shorter, but it's also broader from 9 to 3, and by a significant margin, with a far larger spacing, 22 millimeters versus 19 with the Rolex, giving this watch more wrist presence, almost as though it's splayed out and flattened across the wrist, despite being a more compact watch. This is a little bit more of a contemporary shape and better executed from a design perspective. The case is cambered or arced, so it does wrap around the top of your wrist. Now the strap itself, 22 millimeters at its root, is not quite as integrated as the Rolex. As you can see, the Rolex features absolutely no daylight between case and strap. Likewise, you can see the difference in their thickness. Let's go crystal to crystal. You can see just how much thicker the Rolex is compared to the Patek Philippe. There's really no comparison here. Patek Philippe, however, giving you an unbolstered strap, sheer side, monotone stitch, cab on the bottom, gator on the top, but significantly reducing the outlay of material and specification by using a spade-style pin buckle rather than a deployant clasp. This is one of my few regrets with the Patek. Rolex did better. For the price of this watch, it should have been a deployant. The case band is a beautiful Art Deco homage to everything from the decorative arts and interior design to, if you will, the top of the Chrysler building. It's a handsome, double-stepped, double-cambered case flank with a little bit of a recessed crown to keep it flush and slick, slim and stylish. The dial, part of the first run of 5124s, is a handsome salmon with a matte opaline finish and black oxidized white gold Arabic numerals in a sort of pre-Art Deco Art Nouveau form. Wonderfully florid. They're paired with a set of leaf hands for hours and minutes, as well as the slightly sunken sub-seconds register. There's a railroad track outboard. It's a simple dial but a strong dial, completely without the extravagance of the Rolex. Both of them are sensational looks, but I feel like the Patek achieves more with less. Turning it over, I mentioned that this movement originally debuted in the 2007 5098 Gondolo. Well, this movement was also properly sized and shaped as a result for a rectangular form watch. You can see how open the caseback is compared to the narrow and constricted display caseback of the Rolex. The movement is also beautifully executed with a finger-style set of bridges for the train. You can see at center there is a true center wheel, there is a third wheel, a fourth wheel, escape wheel, and of course the balance itself. So it's a very traditional Geneva movement layout. You'll also note that there's an engine-turned perlage on the base plate, and as I turn it flush to the camera, you can see the mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges. Although both movements are entertaining in their macro aspect, this watch gets more impressive the closer you get with a loop, whereas the Rolex is best observed from arm's length without a loop. At the micro level, the level of beveling, the black polish of the screw heads, the chamfering of the screw head slots, the execution of the perlage on the base plate, and the richness of the Côte de Genève, all of this is at a different level than what you'll see on the Rolex. You'll also note the original Geneva seal. After mid-2009, all of these featured the Patek Philippe seal. Manual wind, it features a 4 Hz beat rate and a 44-hour power reserve, a free-sprung Gyromax style balance, so it takes and holds its 5-position adjustment quite precisely. Newer versions of this watch will feature a silicone anti-magnetic hairspring, as well as 6-position adjustment, the Patek Philippe seal, and they will be guaranteed to -3 plus 2 seconds a day. So keep in mind the newer versions of this watch are of a higher spec. Appreciate the fact that even the back of the case is cambered, and they use a cambered sapphire on the back as well as the front. Impressive specification. The case back crystal on the Rolex is flat. So let's start with the advantages of this watch right here. Slimmer and more elegant, there's no contest. In profile, it's thinner. It's also broader and flatter. The watch works better as a dress timepiece, as the Rolex seems to have a mass to it that gives it impressive wrist presence but without grace. This watch has grace and it fits easily under a cuff. Both are slim, this one's slimmer. Now, in terms of case size, because this watch is just over 42 millimeters lug to lug, you're going to find that it's an easy watch to wear on a very small wrist. So if your wrist is maybe as small as 13 centimeters circumference, you want to give the Patek pride of place and make it your first choice. I'll also mention that the timepiece is still available as a new model with upgraded specifications. So if you want that Patek Philippe seal, the guaranteed precision that comes with it, and the silicone hairspring, that's now something you can get in a new build 5124. The Rolex has been discontinued since 2014 when it finished up late in the model year. Patek Philippe Prestige, both of these names are blue chip, but Patek Philippe still sits at a slightly higher echelon. I know, snob appeal, but it's an important consideration for someone buying luxury watches. The timepiece features superior movement finish. Both of the movements are interesting to look at, but the closer you get, the more impressive the Patek gets, and relatively speaking, the less the Rolex becomes. I'll also mention that the watch features a bigger caseback sapphire. It's simply easier to see the movement. It's bigger and broader, and while the Rolex movement is uniquely present under a display caseback, this is something you won't see on any other Rolex model. It was a historic first on a production watch. You still feel like there's a lot of mechanism under there that you can't quite see, whereas this watch opens it up, a sprawling vista on the caseback of your timepiece. Now, this watch, purchased new today, would be $27,220, but since this is a discontinued reference and it hasn't been made in a few years, if you were to buy this watch pre-owned, it would be about $17,000. Turning to the Rolex, the timepiece boasts none of the resale value of the Patek, which only loses about 37% on the pre-owned market in the year 2019. If you were to take a new build 5124 and sell it pre-owned today, it would lose 37% of its value, whereas this watch now sells for exactly 50% of its original $17,000 MSRP. But it has its advantages. Technology. You want stop seconds? You want a 70-hour power reserve versus 44? You want a timepiece with the toughness of a full balance bridge and a free sprung index that's actually been through the COSC tests, that features shock protection not just on the free sprung balance but also on the escape wheel. All of the above means you want the Rolex. So this watch is more shock resistant with a longer power reserve, and of course it features proprietary flourishes like Rolex's own shock protection system, whereas Patek Philippe is still using Inca Block. Full clasp. Why doesn't Patek give you a full white gold clasp on a watch that costs almost $30,000? I don't know. For $17,000 back in the day, Rolex gave you a full deployant clasp and a far more substantial strap that is, frankly, more attractive than the one Patek provides. I'll also mention, in terms of movement style, not finish but style, the arrangement of the bridges, the execution of the rayon across the bridges, the black polish at the center of the dished ratchet wheel atop the barrel, and the satin finish outboard. This is a more thoroughly conceived design. The pieces of the Patek are thoughtfully designed and beautifully finished, but they don't quite rise to the level of this caseback, which looks as spectacular as the interior of any Art Deco skyscraper. Moreover, I'm going to mention that this is probably the ultimate pre-owned value. Sure, if you bought this watch new, you got soaked, but if you bought it for half of its original $17,000 price with full boxes and papers never polished, make no mistake, this is the pre-owned buy of our two watches. And I'll also mention that you simply get far more precious metal. The case may lack grace compared to the Patek, but it doesn't lack substance. There's a ton of white gold here, and even more right here. On that count, the wrist heft, this watch absolutely aces the test, leaving the Patek struggling to keep up. Both of these watches are appealing, and I will mention that the Cellini Prince is my favorite modern Rolex, not called Milgauss Sea Blue. That said, the two watches are being pitted against each other, not against their own brethren in their own model lines. And between these two, I'm a sucker for a slim profile and a salmon dial. I prefer the Patek Philippe 5124G. You guys let me know in the comments below which one you guys prefer. And, of course, remember, both these watches available on thewatchbox.com.